Puritan Planet by Carol Emshwiller. This story first appeared in the January 1960 issue of Science Fiction Stories magazine and reappeared in a 2011 collection of the author's stories entitled The Collected Stories of Carol Emshwiller, Volume 1. Carol passed away on February 2nd, 2019, just prior to her 98th birthday. Many of you have probably seen much of her husband Ed's work, as he was a cover artist for science fiction magazines. They were married from 1949 until his death in 1990. This reading is dedicated to both of them. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. Puritan Planet. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Come on, you cat, we're going to crash. Don't you understand? 3 minutes was all they had. 3 minutes to get strapped in tight, and now she wanted to play hard to get. Morgan had seen ships with 2 jets off come down before. They came in fast, and at the last moment, just when you thought they were safe, they flipped over and scarred long, ugly creases in the earth. Where the deuce was she? He crawled on hands and knees, a big, square man, searching under each bunk. Then, cheek to floor, he peered under the control chairs. There isn't time, damn it! We ought to be sitting in those chairs now. It was because he had hit her, batted her out of the way from where she stood right in front of the middle screen. I had to see, girl. I had to see. He never hit her, never had before, and now she was hurt, aloof. She wouldn't stoop to coming when he called, not after that. Damn it, cat, he whispered. I was upset too. No beacon, no radio answer, no landing field, but we have to land the shape we're in. Brotherhood. That's what the charts said was the name of the planet. But you'd think a planet by that name would have a beacon and would answer radio calls and would have a landing field. Morgan had circled the planet 3 times, looking and calling, and he was thinking he would have to ditch in one of the gray seas because they had to land soon. And then Cat had jumped up, blotting out the middle screen for just a second, but it was a second that could mean life or death. He had swatted her away harshly, cursing, but she hadn't made him miss the field. He spotted it right afterwards, abandoned, lumpy, overgrown, but a landing field all right. Anyway, the way they were going to land, the shape of the field, was the least of their worries. He had set the ship on automatic then. It would circle once more, then nose up, and that would be it. 3 minutes they had, and she was playing hard to get. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. She'd never come to his call now. He crawled along the wall by the suit lockers. Then he stood up, stretching on tiptoes, and swung his hand blindly along the locker top. Got her. She almost got away, but he held firmly to the end of her hind leg. Her claws rasped on the slippery metal, clutching anything, but he brought her down and plunked her harshly in the center of the nearest control seat. The wide belt went over her firmly, covering her completely, and fastened with a click. His big hand lingered for a moment on the hump that was the cat under the belt. It's all right, cat. It's all right. He jumped into the other seat. The ship was already nosing up, and there was time to fasten only the middle belt, but it would have to be enough. Then the jets roared. God, did ever a ship shake like this before? It was wrong, all wrong. Meow. It's all right. What was the use? She'd never hear him now, and talking was too damn hard. It was still and black and beautiful, and he wanted to stay in the soft, warm dark forever, but someone was interrupting it with a noise that made his head ache. Gobbledygook, gobbledygook. It was louder this time. He could feel the noise in every joint, a pulsing hurt. Be quiet. Only for just a little longer. Be quiet. Meow. Once, a long time ago, he had had a cat. A soft little she-cat with an M on her forehead and a white-tipped tail. Meow. Meow. He had a cat. Gobbledygook. Gobbledygook. Can you hear us? Brother, can you hear us? Are you all right? Morgan fumbled with balloon fingers at the seatbelt clasp. He swung his legs to the side and sat up. This was the morning after 100 binges, and in the tanks only water, and not much left of that. Can you hear us, brother? Are you all right? Loud and clear, Morgan said. His voice was someone else's, a weaker, breathless man. Loud and clear, damn it! But he was too far from the mic for them to hear. The balloon fingers pulled at the cat's belt. He tried to hold her when she was free. He wanted to make up some way for the confining belt, for the crash, and for having batted at her, but she was more agile than he, especially now, and frightened and upset. She jumped to the floor, ran crouching, and disappeared under a bunk. She was gone to console herself alone, just when he needed to console her. Are you all right, brother? Morgan stepped to the panel and sat down before the mic. He leaned on his elbows and rested his head in his hands. I'm all right, he said. No broken bones or anything, friend? That was quite a crash. Morgan rested his forehead against the cool, dead screen. I'm fine. Ah, good. The relief sounding in the voice was just the sort Morgan would expect to hear on a planet called Brotherhood when someone said they were, after all right. But then the voice took on a sorrowful whine. Brother, brother, you have landed without permission, and it is forbidden. Well, I called in from half an hour out. You were stone dead. I had no choice. I had to land at the closest place, and that was here. The ship's crippled, and I'm low on air and water. Interplanetary Rule number 6A states that one must always have permission. Except in an emergency, and why didn't you answer? Morgan's voice began to have its usual depth. Ah, but friend, we must be careful here on Brotherhood. It isn't as if we were like any other planet. Unfortunately, we've found that in some situations we have to make our own rules. They don't apply to me. Ah, but they do. The voice was terribly sorry. It practically dripped away on its sorriness. Ah, brother, but they do. Landing rules. Most especially landing rules. Morgan's voice was all his own now, and more. Hell, that's against the law. There were others with the first voice, either at mics of their own or crowded close around. He heard their ohs and ahs, and one said, There, you see? And another, I told you so. What can you expect from foreigners? And he swore. He swore. He swore. We have our children to think about, the first voice said. Many died to bring them to this place where they could live and grow protected from outside influences. We have loved our children more than life itself, and we so love them now, more than life, brother. Look, we'll talk about it face to face. Morgan felt the first pinch of fear drawing up the skin of his face and tightening his scalp. The floor was comfortably down, as usual. The control room rotated smoothly with the pull of gravity, but in front of him, on the panel, was a bubble on a graph that showed how the ship lay. No, he wasn't coming out. Not just now he wasn't, and probably not at all without help from them. Air. For how long? That was the thought that had made his scalp prickle. He couldn't stay in the ship. The voice was talking on. "We could lift the ship, brother, so the hatch is free, but we don't think it's safe to our young people." "What do you mean, not safe? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not different from anybody else. Men from other planets know many things we have forgotten, even in what they take for granted. You have used words, too, that it is written in our book must not be said. There may even be things written down there that you might do." The voice whispered now, implying things too horrible to be mentioned or even thought about. "We cannot take that chance." The voice, the sad, sad voice, the new rules, and the children. More than life, they said they loved them, and Morgan knew whose life they had in mind right now. He had heard of colonies like this before. Puritans, they were, and the hardest, the severest people to deal with. Could he ever have said what they wanted him to say, even if he'd known in time? Could he yes and no on signal, and lie and fawn? Only actually would it be lying. Morgan was against sin like everybody else. He was for goodness and brotherhood and all the things they were for, except maybe the outside trappings of it. There was the difference. The veneer he cared for not a bit. In fact, he always gave just the wrong answers to the people who wore the clothes of goodness too tight, with all the zippers done up neatly. If he had tried, he doubted he'd have been able to ingratiate himself to these people. He'd have said the wrong things or laughed at the wrong time. And it was too late. The ahs and ohs had condemned him. He had been a witness against himself already. And perhaps even without him saying a word, they'd have condemned him because he wasn't one of them. "If I get out of here on my own," Morgan asked the voice, "what's my life worth then?" "We of Brotherhood do not kill, even in self-preservation. Only sometimes when it is necessary we let die. That's all. But we never kill a fellow man. If you come out, we must let you go free, only we cannot help you." "I'm coming out then," Morgan said, but in his head the word air kept repeating itself with a big question mark after it. Was there going to be time enough to get out? "We leave you then," the voice said, "and for your sake, good luck." Ha! So now to get out, damn them. The first thing to do was to see how much air there was. Morgan studied the gauge on the panel, but it was broken. Well, it was easy enough to calculate. Take what the gauge had read before the crash. He remembered approximately. Subtract the number of hours, add one big man and one small cat. What was the answer? Maybe a day's worth? About another 24 hours. 1 day to get out in, and to do it, a hammer, a welding torch, crowbar, assorted small tools, wire, a pulley, and 2 spacesuits, ridiculous every one of them, especially for someone in a hurry. He took the crowbar and let himself out of the control room into the coin-shaped section at the back of it from which the hatch could be reached. Only the hatch was flat to the ground, probably underground, 5 or 6 feet from the force of the landing. Morgan pulled the emergency opener, but the hatch was jammed tight and wouldn't budge. He tried the crowbar and the opener together. No dice. So he would have to climb into the narrow strip between the outer skin of the ship and the suspended room to the only other place he could get at the seams. He stepped up on a girder and pulled himself in. It was cramped and greasy, and half of it inaccessible anyway. His heavy shoulders rubbed on each wall unless he stood sideways. He climbed from girder to girder, examining the seams, hoping for some damage somewhere he could take advantage of. He tore his overalls on a projection and swore loudly, and the words echoed back at him satisfyingly. "When I get out on this Puritan planet," he thought, deliberately not letting himself think, if I get out, I'll have to build myself an echo chamber so I can hear some swear words now and then. He began to sing a bawdy song. It sounded like a whole chorus of deep-voiced men, and right after that he found the place where the ship seemed bent a little, and one seam had a closer look. "You see," he told himself in a loud voice, "what a song like that can do." And he tried to fit the useless crowbar into the groove. All he needed was a little air to give him time to break out. They had joked about these little ships when they first came out. Held up by their own air pressure, they said, like balloons. Get them landing on a heavy planet and they'll fall apart. He knew the ships weren't used near the big planets, but still they were tough. There was one way to test the theory, though, for someone not afraid to lose all his air in the process. Morgan was afraid, but it was the only thing he could think of to try, and anyway, was he just going to sit around breathing the air till it gave out? By some fluke, it might possibly work. He knew what the seams were like. They would be weaker if the pressure came from outside. Singing again, it was a lucky song, he went back into the control room, got the wire, some metal rings, the pulley, the welding torch. After 2 hours of sweaty work, he had 4 tight wires pulling inwards from rings on the 2 plates next to the weakened seam. He went back to the control room, got out the 2 spacesuits, and started looking for Kat. He flushed her from under a bunk, chased her in a circle around the room, and finally cornered her behind the locker. He held her firmly in the crook of his arm, one hand under his chest. He could feel her heart beating rapidly under his fingers, and then he felt the vibrating of her silent purr. She wasn't really so mad at him after all. He put his head down so his rough cheek touched the silky fur. This small thing, warm with life, was the only living creature he had seen or touched for a long time. "Come on, baby," he whispered in her ear. "I've got a nice dark place for you where you can be alone." He put her before the suit neck and gave her an encouraging push from behind. She sniffed the edges daintily and then peered inside. "Be a good girl and go on in." Dignified, sedate, she stepped into the body of the suit and disappeared into the dark lower sections. "There, I told you it was just what you were looking for." Morgan carefully set the air and temperature dials and tried the helmet on himself first. Then he switched on the suit radio good and loud so he could hear her if she was in any trouble and snapped the helmet in place. Lying on his back, he squirmed into the other suit, then sat up stiffly and adjusted the helmet dials. He turned the radio up loud and put the helmet on. There was a sound, a rustling from the radio, and it didn't sound like Kat. Then there was the sigh of someone taking a big breath, someone bored. They were monitoring him. They couldn't hear much unless he was close to the panel and the mic, but they evidently wanted to hear what they could just the same, to see if he was actually going to come out. Or, he thought bitterly, if he was dying, when that would be. Maybe they wanted to be ready so as to give him a nice funeral. "I hear you," he said. "I know you're there. What are you listening for? Death rattles?" There was a startled, sniffing sound, but no answer. "Brotherhood!" Morgan said it like a curse. He took the hammer and pounded the lid off the water tank. Then he opened the air pressure release valves, one-way valves, out only, and turned up the thermostat as if the planet, Brotherhood, was colder than space, and to Morgan it seemed that it was. He leaned back in the suit, resting the legs in lock position. Now was the time for that lucky bawdy song again. Having an audience listening in would give him a special satisfaction, too. The ship was efficient. It took only 10 minutes before the control room was full of steam. What do they think on the outside? Morgan wondered, to see all the steam coming out. He watched it flow toward the air vents, and when it slowed, he gave out a loud, long string of curses. "That's for luck," he told whoever it was that listened in. Then he set the thermostat down to the bottom like he was in the middle of hell. If it works, he thought, it ought to be so damn cold in here that I'll see the air condensing as it comes in. Those wires on the plates are contracting, too. A ship built like this, and weakened by the crash, ought to practically cave in with even a partial vacuum and all that pull on the sides. At least there ought to be an air leak, a small one, pretty soon. He waited silently, imagining wisps of dancing, steamy air, but they were only almost there in corners where he wasn't looking. So, it wasn't going to work after all. By God, compliment those engineers. These ships were a lot sturdier than anybody thought. There was a rustle from the radio, the scrape of a chair, and whispering he couldn't hear well enough to understand. "Changing of the guard?" he asked. "Going out to lunch? It's time." Lunch. Good Lord, he was hungry. For the past few hours, he'd been thinking of nothing but getting out, and before that, only of finding a place and landing. Why didn't I think to eat before getting into this mess? He thought. And Kat, she'll be getting hungry too, soon, and making a hell of a racket about it if she has to wait. A man and a cat should at least have a good meal before dying. But then, does it matter? For the first time, he let himself think about death. There was about 4 hours worth of air left in each suit, more for the cat, less for him. That was the measure of life. He was here, strong, alive, in contact with people who could help him if they would. That he would die, it seemed impossible, but he began to realize that it was true after all. There were 4 hours, 4 hungry hours now, to live, and that was all. No. He didn't want it. He wasn't ready. It was useless, silly to die like this for nothing, caged and helpless and for no reason at all. He flexed his arm muscles under the suit. He expanded his chest. He was in his prime. Now was his time to live. No! He felt the sweat then, first damp in the armpits and across his back. Even the air pumping in and out didn't take away the strange smell it had. He stank with a sweat of fear and of rage. Rage at them. Stop thinking, he told himself. Move! He took the heavy hammer and started out of the control room. Move, by God! It couldn't help him escape, but he had to keep from bursting inside. He stood in the cramped space before the weak seam and swung the hammer, letting it hit the back wall as hard as the outer skin. He could hear the ringing sound even through the suit. He could feel it vibrating up from his feet into his bones. Move! His shoulder muscles bulged against the suit. Move! 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 Meow! He stopped and stood trembling and dripping wet inside the suit. Meow! What's that? It was a whisper from the one at the radio, as if the listener dared not speak at first. But then he said it again out loud. What is that? Morgan, breathless, said nothing. You never said you had a cat. We didn't realize. But Morgan was speechless, filled with a sudden, wild hope. He heard them shuffling and whispering about the radio. There were more people coming. He could be making that noise himself, someone said, and another, no, he was breathing hard. Animal welfare. Call the head of animal welfare. Then a voice came out loud and close to the mic. But we've got to get that cat out. A man is one thing, a creature of sin, but can we let a poor dumb animal suffer and die this way for a man? No! No! Call the derricks. Raise the ship. So, that's the way it would be. And all because of Cat. Shutting him up again would be killing, and they wouldn't do that. He was free. Cat, he whispered. Damn you, Cat. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.